Let's make some fun Christmas tags. So what you're going to need, some scraps of wadding or fusible fleece, or even interfacing will work. You want some scraps of fabric. I've got my little bowl here with all my bits and pieces in. There's ribbons, there's some buttons and stitchery bits. I use these bulb pins, but you can sort of stitch these in, or you could use a safety pin if you haven't got these bulb pins. Some other little embellishments like little Christmas bells. I've got some embroidery floss, that is a little bit optional, and glue, also optional. You just want some things that you can secure your little layers together. So let's have a little bit of a closer look. Now, I started by making a name label on my embroidery machine, and I actually used the medium setting on the font for that one. But if you haven't got an embroidery machine, if you've got a monogram feature on your sewing machine, you could use that. Or if you could just sort of hand embroider, you could just sort of write somebody's name out and hand embroider that, or you could just write it, just you know, get your nice handwriting and just write with a permanent pen on a little bit of fabric. Now, whichever you do, I've actually put a little bit of interfacing on the back. Certainly if you're going to be stitching it, that will just help stabilise it and stop the whole thing from puckering up too much. So I started by making all my name labels, and I've done these for all our studio crew here. So that's what I'm doing for these. Now, if I just take that off, it's held, we've made like a little bit of a fabric topper, and it's held onto the tag by one of those little bulb pins. Like I say, if you haven't got those, you could glue it down, you could stitch it down, or you can use a safety pin, as I said earlier. So that's sort of the basic tag, and on this one you can sort of see I've just sort of ruffled the edge of it, and I've even used a little bit of the selvage on that one. On this one, let me just bring this one in. It's decorated exactly the same way, but I'm actually hand stitching this one. So you can see here I've started to do a blanket stitch with a metallic embroidery thread, and I'm just going all the way around that one, but I've made the topper in the exact same way, and we'll do that in the second stage. So let's start by making the tag. So we're going to start with our scraps of wadding, say fusible fleece, or even an interfacing. You just want something, I like these because they're really sort of nice and soft, and it gives it a little bit of structure so it's not all floppy. And I'm cut them down into a rectangle that's 3 by 6 inches. This is slightly oversized. We're going to trim it back later and make it into the tag shape. And I'm just going to start by taking some of my fabric scraps, and I'm just going to stitch them to that piece of wadding. Now, the one I'm making for Anna, I've already put the backing piece of fabric on, but you could just do that afterwards. On the other ones, I think I started putting the strips on and then I've added the backing later. So if you have a look at that one, there's no stitching on that. I added the backing separately. So it's entirely up to you whether you want it fully quilted or just plain on the back. So I'm going to use this one. I'm going to take my strips to the sewing machine, and we're just going to flip and stitch those down, and we're just going to do that by just getting some random strips, and then I'm just going to sew. Okay, my fabric's directional, so I'm just going to make sure that that's going to be the top. If any of these are directional, if they're not, you don't really have to worry. So I'm just going to start by putting a strip down. And then another strip is going to go on top, and we're just going to stitch that down. So there's our base. Now we can trim that to size, and I'm going to trim it down to 2.5 inches wide by 5 inches tall. So there's the basics of the tag. Now I actually just got a shop bought tag, and I'm just going to put that on there, and with my scissors, I'm just going to line that up with the top. I'm just going to trim off those 2 corners. And there's our basic tag shape. Now we're going to take that back to the machine, and I'm just going to do a small zigzag all the way around the edge. Now you can either go around once or a couple of times depending on the look you want to go for. But my zigzag I made at stitch width 2.0 and stitch length is also a 2.0. Doesn't really matter where you start, but I'm going to start in this bottom corner. I'm actually going to start part way along, it'll make it easier. Now I'm just going to do the first one by hand, just to see that I've got that in the right place. And I just need to adjust it just a little bit. So you want the needle just to come along the edge of the tag. Now we get to the corner, we want to stop with the needle in the left-hand position, so basically it's in the fabric, not off the edge. And then we're going to No, I'm actually just going to go around again. So there's our base tag all made. Now at this point I just tidy up any sort of loose threads or anything that's hanging out, but you just need to make sure you don't cut into your stitches when you're doing this. Now I've gone round twice, so there's a little bit more security there. But you don't have to tidy them up too much, and the whole idea is you know, they look a little bit more organic looking. So there's the base of the tag made. See on this one, we've got the quilting stitches. So now we can embellish. So you can see here what I've done is just put together these little fabric cluster or a little fabric topper. And I've done them different ways. Those I've sort of stitched together a little bit more. On Amy's here, I've literally just got 3 pieces of fabric with the name tag, and then I've just made little cross stitches with some embroidery thread just by hand to hold that together, and then the bowl pin, and I've just put a little bell onto the bowl pin, so you can see that there on Blake's here. So that will now just go into the topper, and then we can put that into the tag, and then that's how it attaches. So let's just have a quick look at how we make one of these. Sorry, I should say before we do that, on Liz's here, I've embroidered just with the metallic thread her name onto one of the little clusters. Like I say, so this one's doing a little bit more handwork, but I've actually made the tag base a very similar way, but instead of doing the zigzag, I'm going around with a blanket stitch to hold all of that one together. So Liz is a little bit different, but the same vein. So let's have a look how I made Amy's little topper here. So I'm just going to grab some fabric scraps, and then I just do sort of a little composition, if you like. So that on that one I've got a little bit of white in the background. So I'm just going to cut a little piece off, and then we're going to have a little sort through some of our fabric scraps here and pick out, is it quite like that one? And I might even leave that pinked edge on. So like that, and then do we want a little bit of greenery on it? I think we might. Let's have a little bit of this fabric with a poinsettia. That looks nice. Now this one, on Amy's, I just sort of cut it into a little bit of a ribbon shape. Let me put that there. And to do that, I've just got a rectangle of fabric. I'm just going to fold it in half. And then we're just going to snip from the corners up to the centre. And we get that shape. So we can just put it together. Something like that. Now that's a little bit wide, so let me just do that again. And let me just take that off and do that again. These are great fun to just sort of sit there and play with, and quite often I'll put together all the little clusters and then I'll come back and sew them. That one, and then now we need to find Anna's name tag, which I believe is in here. Yeah, right there. And then Anna's going to go on top. Now I want a little bit more colour on that one, so I think I'm just going to add another piece of fabric, and maybe this little dotty one. Just felt it needed just a little bit more. Maybe that's a bit too much. Just a little bit more peeking out there, I think. Yep, I'm happier with that. So that's what Anna's cluster is going to look like. So on this one, I'm just going to grab a little bit of embroidery floss. Now you could glue that down, or you could just pin them all together. Stitch. Now I'm going to start just by making a little knot in the back. I'm just going to hold those three things together. There we are, and those stitches just help hold those layers together, but they're still all loose. So there's that, and then we're just going to grab ourselves a little bowl pin and a bell. I'm literally just going to thread that on. And just secure the two together. So that's going to be Anna's. Now all I would do on these is just add a little bit of ribbon. Now you could put your ribbon in before you go round with your zigzag stitch, or on these I attach it afterwards and I just put a couple of little buttons there just for decoration to hold it into place. So there it is, or there they are, our name tags. Really good fun, really brilliant for using up all your little odds and ends and scraps, and you can sort of embellish and be as creative as you like with them.